Before making any serious changes to your life, you should prepare and think it over well, because in new conditions, a person is very vulnerable. In some cases, it can end very tragically and even cruelly, so much so that lifelong dreams will go to pieces. Waller County, Texas, is located just over an hour's drive from Houston. Home to only about 10,000 residents, Waller is a typical Texas American suburb of dirt roads, ranches, and country living. People usually end up in places like this if they want to raise a family or get away from the hustle and bustle of big cities. Jared Dykes was born and raised here. His family was well known to locals. They were quite wealthy. The parents had several properties and land. They settled in a spacious house that stood out even against the backdrop of large local ranches. The Dykes family had a huge house, in front of which they built a smaller guest house. When the boy grew up, it was converted into a house for Jared. The boy willingly used this dwelling, thus fulfilling the dream of many young Americans. He did not need to rent an apartment. It was here that he settled with his young wife. His wife's name was Angie. She was born in Nicaragua in 2001. After coming of age, she emigrated to the United States in search of a better life. Her life path was much more difficult from the start than Jared's. The girl was born into a family where poor parents barely made ends meet. From an early age, she observed what it was like to live in constant financial difficulties. It is not surprising that the girl grew up hardworking, helped her family from an early age, and was very calm and friendly. In the new country, she behaved quietly and preferred to work to support herself and her family. Angie dreamed of building her future, wanted to meet an American to get married, settle in a new place, and get support. The girl was charming and sweet. From the very first meeting with Jared, she attracted the attention of the young man. This happened sometime after the move. Angie barely had time to make new acquaintances. In a few years, she was able to find a place to live and several jobs at once. Everyone saw how happy the girl was that she had made it this far. Angie had big plans for the future. She was sure that everything would work out in the United States. She had no idea how wrong she was. Jared and Angie's paths crossed towards the end of 2022. Anyone who knew the guy well saw that he was fascinated by Angie from the first meeting. He described her as a very energetic and attractive girl with whom he wanted to build a romantic relationship. Naturally, she herself influenced this to no lesser extent, since she began to act actively as soon as she met Jared. The girl saw in him the ideal future husband and father. Despite the cultural and language barriers, Angie took the initiative herself. It didn't even hurt that her English was still far from perfect. The young people's circle was even more amazed when, a month after they met, in October 2022, the couple announced their wedding. They had a small, private ceremony. At first glance, the story of these young people looked like a girl's dream come true. They settled in their own house in a small town. It seemed that Angie from Nicaragua could now build an ideal American family for herself, have children, build a career. Jared had everything that was required for this. The young man was the son of wealthy parents. It seemed that they had no problems with money. He truly loved his girlfriend. However, behind the scenes of this perfect life, everything looked less attractive. Before the relationship, Angie was active on social media. She constantly posted her photos and various posts. But after the marriage, such publications became less and less. She almost completely stopped taking photos with Jared soon after the wedding. People close to her began asking her about this change, which seemed uncharacteristic of the active and sociable girl. But she was reluctant to answer these questions. There were suspicions that her husband forbade her to do all this. Angie only brushed off the questions. She stated that there was nothing violent in her relationship with Jared. But she confirmed that her husband does influence her. It drains her emotionally. However, this did not surprise anyone. Despite the generally goodwill towards the Dykus family, many locals knew that their son had problems with the law. He also had problems with illegal substances and alcohol. His parents were well aware of this, but did not tell Angie, as they believed that marriage would have a positive effect on their son, and that he would give up all his bad habits. In fact, the situation was the opposite. Soon after the wedding, he began to behave even worse. The local community knew that Jared was prone to drinking and using illegal substances, and then he behaved in a less than adequate manner. He was aggressive and often got into trouble. Because of this, the guy came to the attention of the police when he was caught driving drunk for the first time, and even made the situation worse by threatening the police. Many believe that if it weren't for his wealthy parents, he would have ended up behind bars. However, the most optimistic locals believed that Angie would really be able to fix her husband. The couple immediately settled in a large guest house, which was located on the territory of the Dykus. It had been used for other purposes for a long time, and now the parents completely handed it over to the newlyweds so that they could live in comfort and remain independent. Unfortunately, this backfired on Angie. Instead of finding herself in a calm, cozy place, she found herself isolated. She even had difficulty communicating with her family, as Jared was so controlling. He surrounded her with his life completely, family, rules, and habits. At the same time, Angie was not used to giving up, but perceived it as another challenge of fate. She had many difficulties after moving to the USA, but managed to cope with them all. The girl was hardworking, grew up in harsh conditions, but gradually everything worked out. The situation was complicated by the fact that she arrived in Texas without documents. Because of this, she had a constant feeling of anxiety and fear that she would be deported to Nicaragua. Before the wedding, there were difficulties with finding and getting a job. Angie thought that marriage and getting official documents would help her cope. But in reality, Jared quickly began to manipulate it. He often pressured his wife to obey him. She was afraid that in case of divorce, she could lose everything she had strived for so long. Even before meeting Jared, the girl had a lot of work. She took on any part-time jobs to make her life work. After the wedding, it all continued. She woke up before dawn and went to work at the local gym. Then she went to a fast food store, where she also worked part-time until the end of the day. The hope that marriage would become easier did not come true. She also had to work a lot. However, after the wedding, several jobs became untenable. She had to find new jobs, and Jared was mostly unemployed. He only occasionally found a job, but usually he didn't stay there longer than a month. The town itself probably played a big role in this. It was too small. Everyone knew that Jared was troubled and had trouble finding a steady job. Those close to him believed that the young man was struggling to find his place in life. Others believed that he was simply going with the flow and taking advantage of his parents' privileges. At the same time, the young man could be very charming when he wanted to be. But this quickly passed after he married Angie. Now he showed his impulsive side, self-doubt, and anger. Before marriage, the girl had no idea that he had been suffering from behavioral problems for many years. But now it all became obvious. In the first month, changes began. At first, Angie began to distance herself from all her friends and even loved ones. People at work noticed that the once cheerful young woman began to come to work depressed. Often she looked like she was crying when no one was looking. Angie started wearing long sleeves, even when it was very hot. It felt like she was hiding something. It was all becoming more and more alarming. Jared didn't speak Spanish, and Angie's English was poor. Because of this, she even had difficulties in coming to an understanding with her husband. After some time, the girl's closest circle noticed that her husband had become a kind of translator for her. He was the person who kept Angie in touch with the outside world. It was obvious that he was doing it not sincerely, but pursuing his own interests. The man began to manipulate his wife, dominate her. At the same time, his use of illegal substances began to occur more and more often. He would leave home and return late at night. Neighbors began to hear loud quarrels and screams of young people in the Dicus family guest house at such moments. In public, Angie continued to act as if everything was normal. She didn't share her problems with anyone. She continued to work hard, but she never talked about what was going on in her family life. People suspected that she was being physically and emotionally abused, but Angie herself did not confirm this. It is worth noting that she repeatedly showed her arms, which were not bruised despite the long sleeves. She attributed the change in clothing preferences to her husband's jealousy, who does not want other men to look at her. By the end of 2022, Jared and Angie's marriage had already lasted 3 months, but everyone who was close to them already felt a strong tension in the couple's relationship. The honeymoon phase quickly ended. All this was replaced by the dominance of a powerful and not entirely adequate young man. At the same time, there was little concern for Angie. On the one hand, she simply could not talk about her problems because of the language barrier and the total control of her young husband. On the other hand, she had no relatives in the United States who could provide her with support. The couple lived on the territory of the Dicus family. It seemed that Jared's mother and father could help her. Angie's colleagues, who had known her for several years, noticed that she began to behave differently. Previously, the girl laughed at Jared's oddities, but now she admitted to some of her friends that he was totally controlling her. She still hoped that the situation would change, but these hopes were in vain. She told her friends that Jared often came home drunk. She quarreled with him. Because of this, Angie began to come to work more and more often without getting enough sleep. At the same time, the girl continued to deny domestic violence, but she already understood that she was in an unenviable position. The family was thousands of kilometers from the United States of America. Angie didn't even have a car and basically no support, and her immigration status made her afraid and subservient to her husband. Jared's parents also began to notice changes in his behavior during this period. He became increasingly withdrawn, irritable, and aggressive. At the same time, they saw that his wife rather resisted his attacks. They themselves were trying to establish total control over her husband. But Jared's parents also did nothing, being sure that the relationship with Angie would force their son to become more responsible and reconsider his behavior. They were sure that it just needed time. Perhaps the mother and father were reassured by the fact that the young couple lived nearby. Their quarrels were always limited to shouting. No one had ever seen physical violence in this family. Angie was sure that her husband's inappropriate behavior was entirely due to alcohol and drug use. It was they that made him a paranoid and aggressive person. By the end of 2022, a determined Angie told one of her friends that she was confident that she could bring Jared back to normal. She had always been a loyal person, supported her loved ones, and did not want to give up so easily. However, this did not help resolve the crisis in their relationship. In early January 2023, the girl posted a video on her social media page. There was a short video with a commentary, where Angie Diaz was drinking coffee alone while listening to music. It seemed that she looked even happier this way than in the presence of her husband. She posted this short, philosophical message, unaware that she had only a few days left to live. The early morning of January 11th, 2023, began for Angie just like any other morning in the last few months. She woke up, had breakfast, got ready for work, and posted a photo of her food on her social media page. Then the husband came home drunk, and a conflict began, which also ended abruptly. Around 5 p.m., Jared entered the main house where his parents lived and calmly said that he had a problem. He wanted them to come with him to the guest house where he lived with his wife. As soon as his mother and father entered the house, they immediately felt horror. On the floor of the living room lay the tortured body of Angie. The 21-year-old girl was decapitated. Blood was all over the living room and the neighboring rooms too. It covered not only the floor, but also the walls. Splashes were even found on the ceiling. Next to Angie's body lay a regular kitchen knife, covered in blood. Jared's parents were scared, but they did not cover up for their son. They immediately called 911. When the police arrived at the Dykus family's guest house, they were shocked by the brutality of what had happened. Even with their experience in law enforcement, none of the police had ever seen such a bloody crime scene in this quiet little town. Jared was there. He didn't even try to hide or deny his guilt. Instead, the young man immediately confessed to killing his wife, and so easily, as if it did not bother him at all. The police officers believed that the criminal was in an inadequate state. It seemed that he was under the influence of illegal substances, drunk, or simply suffering from mental problems. Detectives who arrived at the scene began to analyze the chronology of events to understand what led to the tragedy. They assessed what Jared was doing before the attack on his wife. It turned out that he was caught on several surveillance cameras at once when he was driving into different stores in his city. He went into one of them barefoot and bought a whole pack of beer. Later, when we talked to the seller, he also confirmed that Jared looked strange, but did not behave aggressively. After that, he went home where his wife was waiting for him. Judging by the guy's words, Angie was unhappy with his behavior, so another argument began. The man himself did not remember exactly who provoked the attack and how. In his opinion, his wife's dissatisfaction was connected with jealousy and problems with work. He remembered some unpleasant text message that he saw on his wife's mobile phone. However, an inspection of her phone did not confirm that she had been conducting any incriminating correspondence. Angie was simply communicating with a colleague at work, where she was planning to go later. Whatever the reason, her husband immediately became angry because he was under the influence of alcohol and illegal substances. The situation quickly escalated. He took a kitchen knife and attacked his wife. Numerous stab and cut wounds were found on the deceased's body. At the same time, the girl practically did not defend herself, so they believed that Jared could have attacked without warning. The medical examiner believed that she was either already dead or unconscious from blood loss when the beheading began. The attempt to dismember the body only added to the horror of the crime. It was not done to hide the body. The criminal wanted not only to kill his victim, but also to desecrate her. It took forensic experts a long time to collect all the evidence on the territory of the bloody guest house. They found the girl's head on the floor in the next room, collected dozens of samples of evidence. Drops and splashes of blood covered everything around. The examination confirmed that an ordinary kitchen knife was used for the murder and for the decapitation of the victim. Detectives were amazed by Jared's behavior. When communicating with law enforcement officers, he did not experience the slightest threat to his conscience. Jared told all the gory details without any hesitation. He showed no emotion at all. He even tried to downplay the degree of guilt, emphasizing that his wife insulted him. But given the way the victim died, it was not easy to do. Angie's body was sent for an autopsy, and her family in Nicaragua was notified of the tragedy. Unfortunately, they were too poor to travel to the United States. They could not even take the girl's body to bury her in her homeland. Luckily, the local community showed sympathy for the story and organized a fundraiser. When locals learned about what had happened, they were all shocked by the level of cruelty. Many also wondered if this tragedy could have been prevented. It was shocking that all this was happening a few dozen meters from Jared's parents' house. but they did nothing to help Angie. Jared, meanwhile, was in custody and was subjected to numerous interrogations. He did not resist and cooperated with the investigation. The man confessed to the murder without any problems back at home, then repeated his story in detail officially at the police station, even at the stage of describing the beheading of his 21-year-old wife. He still showed no emotion, despite the fact that he had sobered up and the illegal substances had stopped working. His demeanor was calm, his voice soft and even. He described the bloody murder as something ordinary, said that jealousy and control over the girl were common in their relationship from the very beginning. There was no love in his words. He believed that she just wanted to use him to gain a foothold in the country, and he was only interested in sex. When describing his actions, Jared stated that his anger made him feel as if he was not the one killing his girlfriend, and that the perpetrator had stepped back and was simply watching. This sounded like a description of mental health issues, but the facts contradicted his words. Detectives believed that Jared had committed a premeditated murder. It wasn't because of his mental problems, or even because he was drunk. Every action he took confirmed that. Surprisingly, before he went to his parents and told them about Angie's death, he took a shower, changed his clothes, and then went to the store and bought some more alcoholic drinks. Videos were found showing Jared going into a gas station about 45 minutes after the murder. He was still barefoot, wearing only his pajama bottoms. When contacted, the seller confirmed that the buyer seemed calm, was a little strange, but there was nothing to indicate that he had committed. After his confession, Jared was formally charged with first-degree murder and held on $500,000 bail. The young man himself did not have the money to pay the amount, and his parents refused to do so. The boy was placed in a block of observation for prisoners suffering from mental health problems. There were also suspicions that he might try to commit suicide, so Jared was under increased supervision. The lawyer tried to minimize the degree of guilt of the killer. From the very beginning, he relied on insanity, demanded psychiatric examinations. During the prison term, pending trial, numerous studies were actually conducted to analyze the mental health of the criminal. Preliminary hearings were scheduled for early 2024. At that point, the prosecution believed that the criminal was sane and could stand trial, while the lawyer demanded independent investigations. Local residents who were not indifferent to Angie's fate were very active throughout 2023. They even held a vigil for her, with her co-workers and friends in attendance, all of whom described her as a positive and bright person who didn't deserve any of this. Her body was eventually flown to Nicaragua, where the family was finally able to hold a funeral. The Dickus family cooperated with law enforcement from the very beginning. The killer's parents were amazed at what their son was capable of. The mother and father communicated with the police a lot. For a time, they were even considered participants in the systematic torture to which the girl was subjected. However, this idea was quickly disproved. It became clear that they saw warning signs, but never considered them to be anything serious. They continued to hope that the marriage would have a positive effect on their son. However, 4 months after the wedding, Angie was murdered. The family's neighbors provided much valuable information. They saw and heard that the young couple was constantly having conflicts. There were rumors that they were mutually oppressing each other. The closest neighbor said that he heard the last conflict a couple of days before the murder. Jared and Angie fought almost every day, with rare exceptions. It was obvious that this was a very toxic relationship. Those who cared wanted to speak out about this tragedy. April emphasized the cultural differences between migrants and Native Americans. They said that the rapid development of relationships between young people leading to marriage was unacceptable, as this could also be considered an alarming sign. However, little could change the controversy. Despite the confession, It remained unclear what had provoked the young man to commit murder and separate his head from his body. It was believed that addictions and mental health issues played a major role. Discussions about early detection of such problems and ways to counter them began with renewed vigor. Jared Dicus awaited his trial behind bars. Prosecutors said they would seek the harshest sentence under Texas law, which meant the death penalty. The defense immediately began to attribute the young man's behavior to insanity. It was obvious that the lawyer was trying to play this tactic. The defense attorney and some experts suggested that Jared suffered from some kind of mental illness that was not diagnosed, which was indirectly confirmed. The young man was emotionally unstable. He had a long history of drug use and probably even an undiagnosed mental illness. The prosecution believed that this tactic was doomed to failure, since the young man's behavior after the crime, his calmness and understanding of what had happened after the murder, indicated premeditation. It turned out that Jared was arrested in November 2022 and was released on bail for drunk driving. The prosecution asked for bail, which was initially set at $500,000, to be doubled, fearing that such a dangerous man could be free. The judge agreed and increased Jared's bail, leaving him behind bars. Following the trial, Jared, 23, was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years, which he will receive in 2043. Angie's loved ones continued to mourn in Nicaragua. Thanks to the fundraising, they were able to at least get the girl's body. The mother gave an interview in Spanish on one of the TV channels in her city. The woman tearfully described her daughter as a very responsible and bright person who did everything for her family. She worked tirelessly in the U.S., constantly sending money home. The deceased girl dreamed of becoming a nurse. Most of all, she was worried about the condition of her aunt, who suffered from cancer and had no chance to fight the disease. Helping this woman with treatment was one of the goals of her trip to the United States. Angie Diaz's story showed how vulnerable immigration status makes a person. The girl had language limitations, was unable to fully protect herself, or even use the support of law enforcement.